Good morning. Welcome on in, everybody. All right. We have a pretty important topic to talk about today. So, I got a consultation request a few weeks back for someone who had come into quite a lot of debt for mostly unfortunate reasons. One had been related to natural disaster, but be that as it may, I realized I needed to make a video for those of you who are in some form of debt and looking to get out of it. So, what we're going to cover today is a pretty simple step by step action list on how to get out of debt. So, the first thing we got to do before we go any further, oh, where's my marker? Thought I had it. There it is. Oh, sorry, it's early here. First thing we got to do is we're going to go list out the steps. All right. So, step zero, and I'm starting with step zero because some of you are irresponsible, to be brutally and frankly honest. The first question, step zero, is why get out of debt? And the answer to that question should be inherently obvious to most of you, but if it isn't, let me give you two good reasons why. The first is a basic moral principle. When you take on debt, what you are telling someone, you are making an agreement, a promise. You are using your word to say, I cannot pay for something now. Therefore, I would like to borrow your money. And in exchange, I will pay it back later, plus whatever interest I agree to pay on top of that. That is what debt is. It is a promise. It is you using your word to make true a deal that you agree to. That's what debt is. That's what a loan is, right? For instance, my mortgage, right? I didn't have money to buy a house outright when I had my South Carolina home in 2021. So I agreed with a bank to take on debt in the form of a mortgage where I agree to pay back all the principal on an agreed upon schedule plus interest. And in exchange, I can live in or own the property in the form of having the deed to the house. It's just I also have a mortgage, right? At any time, I can go and pay the mortgage off early, but I choose to pay on the agreed upon schedule, which is perfectly acceptable. So that's a basic moral reason. If you are a man of your word, you pay off your debts as agreed upon or earlier, depending on what the situation uh, would recommend. If you are the kind of person that wants to run away from your debts or not pay them or stiff your creditors, what you are is a liar. That's what you're doing. You lied when you said you would pay back your debts plus interest that you agreed to. Nobody puts a gun to your head to sign a loan. You go out, most loans, the people who originate loans are originated by the debtor. The debtor is asking the creditor for money. It's not usually the other way around. So if you're the kind of person who would default on your loans or make no effort to continue paying them or run away from your loans or try and stiff your creditors, yeah, you are not a person of your word. You're a liar and you really shouldn't be trusted. You are also the scum of society. I feel very strongly about this. Just don't make promises you can't keep. Be reliable. Those are two shamefully I guess under less found traits than they should be. Uh, People are far too flaky and far too unreliable. When I say I'm going to do something, I do it, or I make every I make to the maximum extent possible every effort to do that thing. It's just that's how you should be. If you promise, you are only as good as your word. And the only way you can increase the value of your word is consistently making your promises real. You have to live up to what you say. So I can't believe I have to even say that, but it does merit discussing. So the second reason that you should pay off your debts in a much more self-interested manner, even in the short term, although this is absolutely self-interested because again, destroying the value of your word is not a good idea. It it just I really shouldn't have to explain that one. But the second one is the value of compound interest. Now, I've discussed compound interest at length on this channel, but a quick little reminder is the rule of 72. So the rule of 72 means, all right, you take your interest rate, right? 72 divided by your interest rate. So 72 divided by your interest rate is going to be that many years to double your money. So if you have an interest rate of 10%, your money is going to double roughly every 7.2 years. You have an interest rate of 8%, right? That's going to be 8 times 9. So that's going to be 9 years. If you have an interest rate of 2%, that's going to be 36 years. If you have an interest rate of 4%, it's going to be 18 years. You get it. So that works for investments, but it also works for debt. In other words, if you don't pay any principal back and you have 4% interest, you keep paying that 4% interest over the course of 18 years or 18 time periods, depending on how the loan is constructed, you'll end up paying double in that amount of time, or you'll have paid that entire amount of interest by the time the loan's paid off, plus the principal, which is double. So for your own sanity, you should be paying off interest just because compound interest is, I mean, it's how modern finance works. It's the entire point. All right. So how do we do it? That's, I know I had to spend a few minutes on the basic, again, I can't believe I have to do that, but we live in such a morally degenerate society these days that people think just welching on debt is it's an acceptable thing to do. It's not. It just makes you a liar. So, first thing you need to do to get out of debt, figure out your situation. What does that mean? Well, you have presumably, if you have taken on debt, you know the amount of that debt. You know the interest you are paying on that debt. And then you know the income you have coming in. So you have to figure out those three things, or you'll never actually be able to make any further progress on getting out of debt. If you don't know how much you have coming in, if you don't know how much you owe, and if you don't have the interest rate at which that debt is collecting or it's accruing interest, you're really off to a bad start. Anyone who is serious about getting out of debt should be able to do this step. If you can't, write to me at askbullmuscle@gmail.com and I'll help you. I'm probably going to kick your ass a little bit, though, if you can't do that step on your own. Number two, step two. This is one where write to me because I can help you a lot more on this one. Number two, figure out your spending, right? To get out of debt, you have to pay down the principal of that debt. That requires spending less than you earn and using that delta between what you earn and what you spend to pay down the principal. This is not rocket science, right? So, what you need to do this is, generally speaking, a budget. You need to track your expenses. I have on my Discord channel, and I can, if anybody wants a copy or the link to it in the comments, just ask. I have a uh, spreadsheet. I have a Google Sheets document, or yeah, it's a Google Sheets file that I use reliably to track everything from cash flow to expenses to spending, and it works brilliantly. I've been using it. I designed it myself, and I've been using it since 2017. So it's very good, to put it mildly. It will give you way more information than you need. And the best thing is, if you want to edit it, just save a copy on your own, and then write. I've got two major categories. One's discretionary and one's non-discretionary for spending. I've got your normal ones: rent, utilities, food, transportation, phone, internet, pretty normal expenses. And then, for discretionary, alcohol, which has been zero for me for almost 2 years now. Hell yeah. Gifts, charity, clothing, eating out, things like that. So you can use that as a base jumping point and tweak it as you see fit. And then I have income and savings, and it calculates savings rates, post-tax spending rates, uh, annualized effective safe withdrawal rates if you're looking for uh, where, am I eligible to retire? What's it looking like? So there's lots of fun things you can do with it. Uh, Actually, I think I need to update it to get that annualized effective safe withdrawal rate in there as a line item. If anybody wants that, let me know and I'll update it. But again, you need to figure out your spending, because if you can't cut your spending to, first off, if your spending is greater than your income, what you have is a fucking problem, because it means you are not financially solvent. If you're not financially solvent, oh boy, your debts are only going to get worse. So you need to be spending less than you bring in to get out of debt. Again, that's not a judgmental thing. That's not a moralizing thing. That is a statement of mathematical fact. There is no other way to do that. You need more income than your spending to pay off debt. So the third thing you need to do is, once you've figured out what you've got coming in, how much you're able to save and therefore use to pay off debts, and then how much you are spending. You've got your situation figured out, you've got your spending figured out, you prioritize. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, prioritize means we look at what your debts are, how quickly they need to be paid off, and what interest rate you are paying. So, especially if you have multiple sources of debt, which a lot of debtors do, you are going to pay off the debt with the highest interest rate first. Dave Ramsey has talked at length about the snowball method. The snowball method is for people who can't do math, okay? You are going to ignore the snowball method because it's stupid, okay? You are going to pay off your highest interest debt first. I don't care what the balance is, and then move on to the next highest, and then move on to the next highest, and go from there. That is just basic rational thinking, okay? I get that it may not be as mentally easy or whatever, but toughen the fuck up and use some math, for God's sake. Don't pay more interest than you have to. Now, there are two caveats to this. The first one is if you can refinance your higher interest debt. If you are in the situation where you've got debt at rates one would consider usurious, usury being the law of charging excessive interest, which is a dumb law, by the way. I think usury laws should go away uh, because you can't. Another classic example of the government trying to legislate morality, where the government is making something illegal and then that illegal thing just showing up on the black market anyway, right? Usury still exists. Go ask the mob, go ask payday lenders, and go ask credit card companies. The difference is that those three, well, the credit card companies get a legal exception. The mob just straight up doesn't care about it being a crime. And payday lenders, I guess they also get a legal exception. I'm not really sure. But the point here is that figure out what those interest rates are and adjust accordingly. If you can refinance, in other words, what refinancing really means is you have a loan. Let's say you've got a loan at 15% interest, right? You've got a loan for $10,000 at 15% interest. Well, what if someone says, hey, you're a pretty trustworthy guy. I would loan you that $10,000 or part of it, $5,000, whatever, at I don't know, 8% interest. Well, you take that. You say, great, you borrow that money and use that money to pay off the 15% interest loan. What you do, therefore, is reduce your costs of paying interest. That's good. You want that. Interests should be viewed as an expense, by the way, in your budget, not as savings. If you have a mortgage, the equity towards your home or payback of principal, that you can consider savings. It's a form of savings because the return on paying back debt is equivalent to the interest you would have otherwise had to pay in the future. It's a form of opportunity cost. This is basic economics. Okay? So refinance where and if it is possible. If you have, this is the second caveat, if you have an interest loan that is below the rate of inflation, pay it back as slowly as possible. Do it legally. But for instance, my mortgage, I deliberately chose to get that mortgage when I did. This wasn't luck. I chose to buy a house in 2021, not because I necessarily wanted a house, but because I saw, okay, the government just threw trillions of dollars of money into the economy through excessive spending in the COVID years. And now that we're out of COVID, we're still doing that, first under Trump and then under Biden. And interest rates are still at rock bottom. They're still at zero. So I was able to get, for the Federal Reserve interest rate was at zero. So I was able to get a mortgage at 2.375% because I chose, by the way, a 15-year loan instead of a 30-year loan. The reason I chose a 15-year loan is because that gave me an extra 0.5% off of the interest rate. Actually, I think it was more like it was closer to a whole percent. I wasn't quite a whole percent, but I got quoted something like 3.1 at a 30-year loan and 2.375 at a 15-year loan, which for me, that's a no-brainer. You take the low interest, right? Now, as a result, inflation is sitting at 3% and it's kind of stubbornly sitting there. It's not really going down more. In other words, the value of the currency is depreciating by 3% a year. Well, the interest on my home is only charging 2.375. And effectively, that means I'm getting paid money, paid 0.0625%, or sorry, 0.625% to borrow money. That's a good deal. So below a certain threshold, for me, that number is 5%. There's good debt and there is bad debt. If you have debt that you know you can pay off, but it's below 5%, keep paying it off at the minimum rate. That's fine. That is, to me, a smart thing to do. Most people don't have that. But if you do, really the only argument I can make in favor of paying off that debt is peace of mind, your own peace of mind, and morality. As long as you plan to pay it off eventually, and I am, right? It's a 15-year loan, so by 2036, I will have it paid off unless I sell the house before then, or decide to pay it off faster. But there's no incentive at present for me to pay a 2.375% loan any faster. Because do I think inflation is going to go below 2.375 anytime soon? I do not. Our government is spending way too much money for that to ever happen. So I'm pretty pleased with that particular loan. If you have debt under 5%, especially if it's under 4%, okay, you can afford to pay that off a little bit slower. But if you have debt at 6, 7, 8, or more percent, no, you need to focus on that, especially if it's over, I would say 7%. The reason I say 7% is because the S&P 500 typically returns roughly 7% on average after inflation, year in and year out. So if you if you have a loan at, let's say, 12%, well, by paying it off, you're effectively getting a rate of return on that money of 12%. That's beating the S&P 500. So that's a very good idea. So if it's my general rule of thumb is if it's below 5, take as much time as you need to pay it off. If it's below inflation, pay it off as slowly as you can. If it's um, above, I would say if it's above 10%, try to refinance it. If it's above 7%, try to pay it off. If it's 5 to 7%, really the choice is yours, depending. I would probably skew to the pay it off side, but you could make an argument for investing anyway, over that. It really depends on risk tolerance and how much debt you have and a lot of other factors as individual. So if you've got a situation like that, write to me, askbullmuscle@gmail.com, and I'll give you my advice, but that's a bit more situational. So that's your prioritize section. Step number 4, act. Okay, so figure out why you want to get out of debt, figure out your situation, figure out your spending, prioritize, and act. Act means as we just talked about, see about refinancing, make some phone calls. It might take some time, but if you can drop that interest rate on a big loan by several percent, and it takes you 2 or 3 hours to do it, your effective hourly wage for having done that is in the several hundreds of dollars an hour. So it's worth your time. Most credit card companies do offer consolidation loans. They would rather receive less interest than have you default or go bankrupt. There are people occasionally that will also consider loaning you money. Private loans or business loans. You can look into that. Personal loans. It really depends on what your situation is, but explore all your options, right? If you can find a way to decrease the rate of interest you are paying on your debt, do it. Okay? It's very simple. As long as you're a man of your word, it shouldn't matter who you owe the debt to because you will pay it off regardless. So you don't have to worry about that. The next thing to do, cut your discretionary spending to zero until your double interest debt is gone. If you've got single interest rate debt, so below 10%, you can be a little bit more lenient. But if you have debt accruing at over a 10% interest rate, that should be considered an emergency and you need to pay that off as fast as you can, right? You really need to be eagle-eyed in the way you spend your money. And every $10 counts at that kind of interest rate. So, uh your worst case, so let's talk a little bit more about cutting spending before I go to the worst case, actually. So, your discretionary spending is going to be things like, going out to eat. You shouldn't be doing that if you have high interest debt. You shouldn't. I think that's a fairly obvious statement to make. Buying alcohol. No, you don't need alcohol to live. In fact, you can live a lot better without it. Buying tobacco, same thing, right? Donating to charity. Right. Put on your own oxygen mask before you help put on the oxygen masks of others. If you are having your ship take on water because you're trying to bail out someone else's ship, you're not helping anyone. You're just making things worse for the both of you, right? Because it's unsustainable. So don't do that, right? Yeah, you cut your charitable spending until you have your own financial house in order. I get that that is somewhat unchristian. There is and as a Christian, I do have a moral dilemma on this one, where there's a passage in the Bible that Jesus says, the poor old lady who gave her last, I forget what unit it was, her last coinage uh, to help someone. She will have the greater reward in heaven than the rich guy who gave it out of his own excess. However, the poor lady didn't go into debt. She didn't go and take out a bunch of debt to help the poor, because then she's not making anybody less poor. She's just making herself extremely poor to make other people less poor. It doesn't. It's not. I don't think that's the takeaway there. So I get a lot of people. If you're Mormon, you have the tithe, and I understand that that's a huge ethical and moral point of contention. But in my opinion, no. You pay off debt first, and then you can give to charity, because then it's sustainable, right? I think being able to reliably give to charity is better than just doing it once and then saying, well, I'm in debt for the rest of my life. Sorry, can't help. Just my opinion. Anyway, cutting your non discretionary spending. You've got three big ones. Three big ones are going to be your housing costs, your transportation costs, and see, your food costs. So, housing costs. If you own a home, consider renting out a room. I did that when I bought my house because I didn't need a three-bedroom house for myself. I only bought it because it was a good investment, and it has been. The price of the home has risen, and inflation has eaten away at the principal of the loan. It's been incredibly lucrative. I wouldn't buy another home. Right, these people who say housing is always a good investment are not necessarily correct. I wouldn't buy another home, and I certainly wouldn't do one out here. One, because from a moral perspective, being Malihini and then buying a home out here is kind of creating a lot of social problems. I feel like that's the most generic possible way to say it, but it is. Um, Moreover, though, between HOA fees, maintenance fees, because most of the housing stock is older here because it's hard to build new stuff, and sky high housing prices, it's not a good investment. I don't get why people are fascinated with buying homes here. They're terrible value. You're much better off renting. And if you do rent, use the smallest possible space. Right, this is it. This room you see, that is the extent of my housing supply. And that's the other one too, especially out here. You know, I get that locals are sensitive to people who are not originally from the islands coming out and taking up the housing stock. Well, by having only a 150-foot square room, I can pretty confidently say that I am leaving the lightest possible footprint in that regard, short of camping in my own van, which has other problems. So in that regard, you can feel good about it. Plus, smaller home is more ecologically friendly. So for the green-minded of you, uh, even further benefits. And for those who are concerned about the housing crisis, if you own a home and you offer up a room for rent, you are creating housing supply by doing that, which lowers housing prices in the long run. So you can be part of the capitalist solution. I get that a lot of you like to use housing prices and carbon emissions as a Trojan horse for socialist politics. And to those of you who do that, I have no use for you. I am. I agree that those two things are problems, but I disagree with your solution. So, I'll work with you on those problems, but no, taxing the rich to solve all these problems and giving more money, giving the government more money that's not going to solve any of these problems. It's not. It's not. Anyway, so cut your housing expenses. Use less housing, basically, is what I'm saying. Now, if you've already done this, okay, that's step one. Number two, transportation. Use a bike in public transit. If you live if you live in any location with expensive housing, typically this means you live in a city of some kind. And typically this means cities you can bike or you can ride public transit in. Not always, but most of the time. And if you live in a place with expensive housing stock and no public transit or bikeability, consider moving. If you have that situation, you better be getting paid a lot to live there because that's a low quality of life, if you ask me. But cars are extraordinarily expensive, right? Now, the way I've done it out here, I have a car, but it is a luxury optional extra. I do not use it to go to work. I seldom use it honestly, I'll use it once, maybe twice a week on the weekends to go to a hiking trail or to go to the beach. And frankly, if I really needed to, I could sell it immediately, go car free again, like I did the first year I lived here, and use the bus to go to those locations. It would simply be slower. So on the weekends, having a car, plus it's nice to pick up friends, and plus that K van's a lot of fun. I need to finish that video. That's a different conversation. So ride a bicycle, or use public transit. You can find cheap bikes on Craigslist. There are even some charities that give bicycles away because it's a great way to help mobilize the working class. Seriously, the bicycle is one of humanity's greatest inventions. And then food. So cheap holy grail meals. I have a list of them on my Discord, and I can make a video about that if y'all are ever curious. But right, you can, if you really want to, you can live on under $100 a month for food costs. I know because I have done this, and you can live pretty decently. It is a miracle of the modern industrial age that we can do this. There are a few basic foods that can give you a good head start on this. The first and probably greatest food for min-maxing cost per calorie is peanut butter. Peanut butter is a godsend. It is good amount of protein, plant-based, unfathomably cheap. Right, a good size, like you get one of those Costco size containers, or large containers, bulk containers of peanut butter. It may have as many as 10,000 calories in it. That is enough to feed the average person for 4 days, or feed someone like me for two and a half. That's huge, right? That I mean, if you and you can get one of those for between Even out here, it's only $6 or $7. On the mainland, it's probably less than five. So there is no reason not to use that. Now, if you've got a peanut allergy, don't worry. I have other foods. But if you if you don't mind peanut butter, it is incredible. It is the value you get for peanut butter is amazing. Rice and beans. Let's talk about rice and beans because rice and beans are good. They are incredibly environmentally friendly too. So if you're one of the more green-minded people, bulk rice and bulk beans should be something you're eating. Lentils as well, if you want to switch up. The lentil is more or less the same thing as a bean in terms of macronutritional content anyway. But there are billions of people on this planet that live on rice and beans. And if you think you're too good to do it, you need to check your own ego. I did for years. There's nothing wrong with a basic right some form of rice, some form of beans. My favorite is rice, pinto beans, couple cans of diced tomatoes, if you have them, and then some Tabasco or a little bit of Mexican style hot sauce, whichever hot sauce you prefer, or salsa if you really feel like jazzing it up. That's it. It's not fancy, but it will feed you. And this is right, you're in a debt emergency at this stage. If you're at the point where you're looking at having to slash your food budget, you've got a lot of high interest debt. So if you're getting to this point, if you're getting to the rice and beans stage, you are in an emergency, and this is an emergency style kind of food. So no, it's not going to be gourmet cooking. It's going to be what can I what can I purchase for the fewest amount of dollars that gives me the most amount of calories. So rice, beans, peanut butter. The nice thing about all these, by the way, is that they require very little in the way of cookware or appliances to make. You'll need some form of heat to boil the beans. That's about it. Uh, you don't even need that if you buy them canned, but then they're more expensive. So I recommend buying a big bulk bag of dry beans and having a pot. You can even cook the rice and beans together, though I don't recommend that. I got a rice cooker at Mapuna Puna Goodwill for $5. You can do the same. Uh, I will grant, cheap rice cookers is a nice thing about living on Oahu in particular, but you can find most used secondhand stores will have any cookware you need if you're really at that stage. Anyway, so rice, beans, lentils, canned tomatoes, peanut butter, nuts of most kinds, although peanuts are really the best option for cost per value. You can go with meat. Used to be that eggs were a very cheap source of protein. That's not the case anymore, I will grant. Although even at current prices, they're still pretty good. I know out here it's like $5, $6 a dozen for eggs, right? I don't think it's like that on the mainland. If it still is, please let me know. I'm curious, actually. What is the price of eggs on the mainland? If eggs have gotten back under $3 a dozen, they're a good deal. Uh, Even though that's nowhere near what they used to be. So those would be some really basic options. You can find, if you're at that stage, that's where you may want to consider even going on using WIC or benefits. I have mixed feelings about supplemental food benefits, but if you are using that, in an attempt to try and get out of debt, I I don't have a problem with you. I'll put it that way. That's that's noble, if nothing else. So those are some basic options. There are a lot of other very cheap meals you can make. Flour, right? You can buy a big sack of flour. You can get water, and you can make Johnny cakes, right? It's not fancy. You can season them. Maybe if you've saved a little bit, you can have a little bit of cheese with it. You can make basic. It's like a basic cheese and it's like a basic kind of a cheesy pancake. I've done that. Peanut butter and a banana on a tortilla. I lived on that in college. You can get by on under $100 a month for food. Do I do that anymore? No, but I'm independently wealthy, and y'all aren't. Not to be immodest, but yeah. Anyway, that's really about it. Um, if you have further questions, this is the final. The final step I will tell you, if you have further problems, ask people for help, right? Even your credit card company, again, as I've said, most creditors, most creditors would rather you work with them on a payment plan or some kind of way to partially pay it back than for you to go bankrupt. And that would be the final option. If everything else fails, including trying to renegotiate, cutting your spending, and so on, and you are still insolvent from your debts, declare bankruptcy. It's dishonorable, but it is legal, and while you will suffer some serious consequences, no one will want to lend you money for a long time, at least 7 years, because, well, yeah, you went bankrupt. In other words, you welched on all the debt you had. Uh, of course, nobody's going to want to lend you money. It damages your credit score immensely. But bankruptcy is an option if you truly are at the end of the line. Uh, don't don't go that route unless you truly have exhausted all other options. But those things do happen. If that's the case, well, so be it. But generally speaking, most people's debt problems don't require bankruptcy as a solution. That's all I got, though. By all means, if you've got your own personal finance questions or questions about anything else, diet, fitness, uh, philosophy, you name it, write to me. AskBullMuscle@gmail.com. Oh. As for me, it is just before 7 o'clock in the morning here, and I have to go to the gym. I got pulls today. So, as always, y'all, make good decisions because those good decisions form your actions. Those actions form your habits. Those habits form your values. Those values form an ethos that can be the guide star through the rough waters of life. Much love. Come in for the hug. See you tomorrow. Probably.